So, hey, everybody, today it's going to get personal and we're going to talk about e-commerce, React, and the static web. So who am I? I'm Colby Fayock. I'm the one hugging BB-8 and Kylo Ren over there. I work with the dev community as a developer advocate for Applitools. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the web by just Googling my name, as I'm the only one in the world. So let's look back to about the end of 2019. It both feels like it was 10 years ago and last week. We were able to all safely go out to restaurants. We could meet up with family and friends. We could even grab a bite to eat alone. Now we can sort of do some of that stuff, but it's really different and it's still not completely safe. But I don't think any of us expected that 2020 would be the year that we would meet a pandemic. I know I expected it to be the best year ever, but that's realistically what happened. Stores and restaurants started to shut down because they couldn't support the decline in business. I lost my favorite restaurant in Virginia, and I was really hoping to hit it up one last time before I moved up to Pennsylvania. Luckily, some restaurants were able to sustain themselves. Between apps like Uber Eats and Instacart, we've been able to attempt to have normal lives, but at home. Restaurants have also attempted to offer curbside pickup for themselves, but this can be really hard for business owners, especially if they're not used to fulfilling orders that way. Because we have the options out there like DoorDash and Uber Eats, these restaurants could quickly start accepting orders online without having to deal with all that infrastructure. Unfortunately, some of these services tend to cut deep into their restaurants' profits, so this still makes it challenging for them. But this most certainly helps some of those restaurants stay afloat. Now, the reason that some of these restaurants had the opportunity to save their business is because of e-commerce. Now, small brick and mortar mom and pop shops that have over 50 years of business experience might have that experience that helps when you're actually in person. But when you're in a lockdown, all of those in-person advantages start to fade away. So let's talk about e-commerce. The concept of e-commerce probably isn't new to anybody here, but it's simply the act of buying and selling online. Whether you're buying your t-shirt for your favorite TV show or buying some food for a local restaurant or even fulfilling a prescription, e-commerce gives us a way to buy things without ever leaving our home. And it's not slowing down. We saw a huge amount of growth in 2020, well, because the obvious, but more and more people are getting comfortable with buying online. And in the middle of the pandemic, more and more people need to buy online. And on top of that, a lot of these services are just simply making it even easier to buy online. As developers, we're the backbone of this growth. Every online store has a single developer or a huge team of developers that built that experience. We're the ones that give people the ability to actually buy online. So that makes it really compelling to have a general understanding of how these things work. But before we get into the development side of things, let's take a quick step back and talk about e-commerce a little bit more broadly. While the concept of an online store may not be new, and you might be generally familiar with how it works, let's break down some of the core characteristics of a store. What are some of the different pages that make it actually possible for somebody to buy something? Well, to start, we have a product listing page, or PLP for short. These pages come in a pretty wide variety, from a page that includes all the products under a single category, like apparel, or it could be a clearance page, which would include all the products that are marked down for clearance. The point, though, is ultimately it's going to be a page that's a list of all the products that somebody can browse through. Next is the product details page, or the PDP for short. It's the page that shows a single product. Typically, that includes the different variations of a product if there are some available, such as the colors or different sizes. But this page also gives the most comprehensive look at a single product. It's also where somebody might typically actually make the purchase for that product. Some sites have a nice little quick add to buy when you're in the PLP or the product listing page, but you'll always be able to find that add to cart button or buy button straight on the PDP. Next, we have the cart page. After you find the product that you want and you add it to your cart, just like a real life shopping cart, you have all those products that go into your cart, which then you can take with you, check out, and pay. Which leads us finally to those checkout pages. Sometimes there's a single page that represents the entire checkout process, but more often you'll find that to be a multi-page process, which will provide a little bit better of an experience as somebody's actually having to work through those, which here you'll have things like your shipping information, your billing information, and you'll actually confirm your payment. And if successful, you'll have purchased that product and usually given a receipt. As I was walking you through all those pages, we essentially stepped down through what's called an e-commerce funnel. which you might be able to kind of figure out why it's called that. But as someone is moving from a listing page to a details page, all the way through that checkout page, they're moving through a journey of steps in your online store. That journey kind of looks like a funnel the way that it's represented by data. Starting from the top, which may or may not include that product listing page, is where people typically enter your site. That could be by browsing through a listing page, or it could be directly to a product page. Maybe they found it on a Google search or found it linked online. Whatever the case, the first page is going to be the top of that funnel. But through every step of the way, more and more people are going to drop out of that funnel. Maybe they had second thoughts, or maybe once they got to the cart, they realized that they already have a bunch of other products and it's just a little bit too much money. But either way, most people aren't going to actually hit that checkout page. And even those who do, only a percentage of them will actually proceed to make that purchase, which, as people filter out, that's where you start to get that funnel shape. But ultimately, these are all critical pieces of a typical e-commerce store. We want to be able to optimize that process so that people visiting our stores have a good experience, and each of them comes with their own unique challenges. Now, I would bet that I would bet that all of you have purchased at least one thing from a website before contributing to that original growth chart from earlier. E-commerce shouldn't really be new to anybody, but I'd like to talk about how we can look at e-commerce from a developer perspective. What are some of the challenges of e-commerce? Well, back to our product page, beyond the typical layout like the branding and the navigation, we have some critical components to this page: the image, the title, the price and the variations, the cart, and the button to add it to the cart. When we're trying to serve this page, it can't just be pure static HTML. Some of these pieces need to be highly dynamic in an online store. Parts like the image and the title, they shouldn't really change that often. So they're probably okay being static and waiting for the HTML file to update again. Even the variation selection, we should still know all those variations ahead of time. So that could probably be a static list of options as well. But the price, the availability of them and its variations, and even being able to purchase it, they all need to be accurate when somebody is trying to buy it. If the price is wrong, your customers might complain that they're getting overcharged. If someone buys that item and it's sold out, you're stuck not having enough items to actually send out to people, meaning canceled orders and unhappy customers. The good thing is, though, we have a lot of options where how we can solve this, where some solutions are a little bit more traditional, but we also have some modern techniques that can help us give our customers a great experience. Serverful solutions are probably the more traditional route, where the browser makes a request to the server, that server renders a page, and returns that HTML to the browser where the customer can actually shop. With a serverful solution, our dynamic content really isn't a problem. Each page actually hits the request actually hits the server. So that page can be completely custom tailored to that visitor's state, whether that's reaching out to a database to grab that person's logged in state or grabbing a real-time price and availability of an item. But there's another option where we can actually serve our website completely static. Instead of that server actually taking the time to render that page, we serve static files straight from storage. That includes the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and any files that we want to show to our customers. When it's served statically, we don't have to worry about any of that work on the server, where we deliver that website directly to our visitor. In order to make those pages dynamic, which is critical to e-commerce, we can reach out to the APIs from within the browser or at build time. So what would this actually look like in practice? So showing some images and text on a page doesn't need to be dynamic. Leveraging the tooling we have, we can statically generate the page's HTML and CSS along with any of the JavaScript and dump that into object storage. We can even display a bunch of products on a grid, like the PLP, like we talked about before. That also doesn't need to be dynamic. There's nothing necessarily special about how this page needs to be put together. And just to be clear, I'm not sure if Space Cadet, the store that I've been showing here, is actually static. I think they're actually on something like Shopify. But beyond a typical content management solution that triggers a new deploy on update, this doesn't need to be real-time dynamic. But again, moving back to our product page, the vast majority of this page can still be static. Our images and meta information can be served directly from static hosting. We can let that refresh with a new deploy whenever something changes. To provide the dynamic aspects, we can take advantage of client-side requests. We can pull that price directly from our e-commerce platform like Stripe, for instance, so that it's always up to date. For our cart, we can store that state in local storage, or we can use a serverless function to hit a database to grab that information. The stock is probably the trickiest thing of all this. Imagine a website like Amazon, where you may literally have a million people trying to buy one single product at the same time. And on top of that, that product might have very limited stock. You need to be able to support very quick read and writes to avoid overselling. Content management systems typically aren't really equipped for that type of thing. So you want an ecom service that has inventory management actually built in, or a performant database solution. That way we can avoid those unhappy customers. But as we sort of dissect this page, we can see how realistically we could serve the underlying page of this completely static, which will alone give us a ton of wins while still maintaining the dynamic nature of an online store. Now, those dynamic pieces are probably the bigger challenges you'll face with e-commerce. But I mentioned that by serving our pages statically, that we're going to get a lot of other benefits. So what exactly are those benefits? Well, once we have those core pages in storage, we can serve them from a CDN like Cloudflare or from AWS or Netlify. We're using a CDN with those pages to get served from locations all over the world. They'll at least be relatively close to your visitors, which means they're going to get served super fast, which is a good thing because people want their pizzas super fast. Like here, Little Caesars used Gatsby for their website and ordering experience. But beyond hungry customers, page speed is important because it directly correlates to conversion rate. If you're not familiar, conversion rate is the percentage of your traffic that actually buys something. There are a ton of studies on this, but eBay, for instance, found that a 0.5% increase in their conversion rate with a 100 millisecond load time improvement. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but eBay is worth over $10 billion. So just purely as an example, 0.5% of 1 million is 5 million. So that adds up pretty quickly. And bonus, serving static files on a CDN most likely means less downtime. The fact that the page files and the static are on top of that cached at the edge, those pages will infinitely scale. You don't really need to worry about how your website will scale aside from the APIs. There's a far less of a chance that you're going to get completely taken down by the old Reddit hug of death, or by an instant surge of high volume traffic, which could mean lost money if people can't buy your products. It's also going to be cheap. While this might not matter as much for big corporations who have a lot of money to throw at this, for small business owners and individuals, every cent counts. The fact that there are so many services with alone free tiers, you can literally get your store up and running for free and then scale the cost of actually processing payments as you grow. So now that I've convinced you as to why this is a good idea, where do we actually start? While trying to narrow down an e-commerce store to 3 things feels like a little bit of an oversimplification, there are really a couple of core components of an online store. You have your products that you want to sell. You have to be able to take orders and payments for those orders. And you ultimately need to fulfill those orders. Those 3 things work all together to provide that goal of being able to sell things online and get them to the person who actually purchased them. First off, in order to have a store, you need to sell something. What products do you actually want to sell in your store? The products are the first thing that customers are going to see when they actually visit your store. Where are they actually going to store those information about the products? Is it going to be a CMS, a content management solution, or is it just going to be a static JSON file? How are you going to actually show those products? Maybe just have a few products on one page and that's all you have. Or maybe you have an entire catalog with advanced search capabilities for people to actually find things. While most of the heavy lifting of an online store happens in the background, you first need to have an idea about what those products actually are that you're going to try to sell, as well as how much they are actually going to cost. That way you can give your customers some kind of option for what they can buy. Second, when selling something, you need to ultimately take people's money. How are you going to take those orders and the payments for those products? Once your customers find what they want, they'll need to be able to pay for it. Are you going to interface directly with a payment processor, or are you going to create a bunch of forms to take all that information? Or are you going to use a service that handles everything for you, including the checkout details? Taking payments and dealing with addresses is very complicated, even more so when you start to deal with international customers. These are sensitive parts of your online store that need to be handled with a lot of care. Building this all out yourself is completely and definitely doable, but it's not something that you want to take lightly. But regardless, you need to figure out how you can securely take the payments for your store and then relate those payments to an order. And third, after someone picked out what they actually wanted and you took their money, how are you going to actually deliver that product to your customers? Is this digital product that's going to be allowed to be emailed, or is that somebody can download? If so, how will that work? There are a bunch of integrations you can use. It's not perfect, but I use a mix of the Stripe API and email service for my ebooks. But not every platform makes it super easy to have a customizable end-to-end workflow. If it's a physical product, do you need their shipping information? Who's going to actually pack up that item and ship it? Some e-commerce platforms might handle that for you, but a lot of them won't. Once you take somebody's payment, you're on the hook for getting them what they paid for. You need to be sure that that fulfillment process is actually working smoothly. And while all these are critical pieces to building an online store, we're really going to focus on the first two pieces of this. There's a lot of software and technology that can even handle the fulfillment. And there's a lot of options for embedding that software in your online store and emails so that your customers are getting a personalized experience. But as developers, more often than not, we're concerned with about how we're actually going to get those products up on a page and how we can let people buy those products. So we're going to focus on that. So with that said, we need to figure out what our stack is actually going to look like. What are we going to actually build our store on top of? Well, as we talked about a bit earlier, there's a ton of serverful solutions that you can even spin up your own with completely custom infrastructure. That's exactly the type of system that I worked with when I worked at ThinkGeek like 7 or 8 years ago. It was on a good old fashioned Perl code base. But in modern times, a lot more powerful ecom platforms have risen up. Shopify, for instance, provides a super powerful solution. It comes with an all-inclusive feature set. This lets you do a ton of stuff with just Shopify alone, but like complete product management or page creation and even checkout. But if you're a new business or you're building a project for your portfolio, this is going to come with a really hefty price tag. And this isn't only Shopify, to be clear. Most vendors like Shopify have similar price tags. Another familiar solution is WordPress. You can use tools like WooCommerce, which are really popular in the WordPress ecosystem. With it, you can easily sell your products on a website. But with WooCommerce or any serverful solution, you'll likely have to maintain those servers, which frequently have costs involved. Again, similar to Shopify, these are great, powerful solutions. But I just convinced you that we want to build this out statically, right? And we're not looking to spend a ton of money just to spin up our first store. Which brings me back to static applications. One of the cool things about the dev and the Jamstack communities is there's a ton of vendors who offer free tiers for us devs who just want to get started. This applies to whether you're spinning up your own sticker store or if you're building your portfolio. There are e-commerce services that can handle things like payments. They take a percentage of the transaction rather than a monthly cost, which means that you're only going to have to pay money if you actually make money. To start, we need to manage our products somewhere. This is where we can take advantage of a headless CMS, where we can pull those products in at compile time and load that static metadata that we were talking about earlier. In my case, I use WordPress for my spacejelly.dev website. I know WordPress probably isn't the most popular solution in the modern bleeding edge world, but it's working really well in my case and is a common platform if you're building this for somebody else. There are also a ton of other options available too. Another cool thing about the Jamstack community is there's a ton of services available, meaning it's likely you're going to be able to find one that actually fits your needs. You'll also then be able to manage both taking payments, but also be able to have someone actually add products to a cart. One example to do this is Snipcart, which is a drop-in solution that lets you easily add a shopping cart to pretty much any type of website. Once you add in the Snipcart script from their CDN, you literally just need to add some class names and data attributes for your product data. And this doesn't apply to only static sites like we've been talking about. You can really do this with their script on any kind of website. But once you do, you pretty much immediately have a shopping cart on your website backed by their platform. This includes the entire checkout process. This is a really great solution if you don't want to spend a ton of time trying to deal with all that shopping cart logic. It can be a bear, and this makes it super easy to do. I actually use it for my spacejelly.dev website store. It also includes things like inventory management and payment processing. You can avoid having to deal with manually keeping track of your stock. Snipcart and other e-com platforms can handle that for you. But you also have a lot of other options. Like if you want to dig a little bit deeper and work on a completely custom solution, you can use your favorite framework like Next.js or Gatsby, where once you create your new app, you actually have full access to the React APIs. With it, you can create your own shopping cart. Since at that point you have that flexibility of React, you have full control of how things are getting added, actually being able to add that item to their cart and getting to that cart page. You also have those full capabilities of the React's baked-in APIs. So you can manage your own shopping cart state with React's use state hook, and you can make that state global with the context API. That way you can provide the exact experience that you want for your customers. Or if you want the custom experience, but you don't want to manage that tricky cart state, you can even use a pre-built library like Use Shopping Cart, which will give you a cart system right out of the box with a React hook that will immediately allow you to get productive with cart state in your application. With either of those solutions, though, you can either store that state in local storage. That way, when someone actually reloads the page or leaves and comes back after a few minutes, they can still see all those products in their shopping cart. You can even persist that cart state in a database, but that doesn't necessarily become critical until you need to persist that state across different sessions, or if you want to support a shared cart between different devices. But either way, once you have your cart state, you can use something like Stripe Checkout, where you can push your customers into a checkout solution. While Stripe Checkout won't handle all aspects of an online store, similar to Snipcart, Stripe will actually handle the checkout process, which is one of the bigger pain points of actually being able to take people's money. The cool thing about this static approach, though, is you can take advantage of APIs for all aspects of the dynamic pieces. So we can still even use services like Shopify if we want. While you'll still be paying that hefty price tag of Shopify, if you're already there or you need all those services that Shopify actually provides, it makes for a great opportunity to leverage both worlds, the benefits of a static site and your Shopify store. But whatever service you choose, you'll ultimately need to deploy it somewhere, which is actually probably the easiest part of all this. Once you have that compiled version, you can serve it really wherever you want, because at that point, it's really just object storage with static files. So whether you want to use Netlify or one of the other many cloud providers that we have available, you have a ton of options. So what's stopping you from spinning up a new online store? The cool thing about e-commerce is it's become a fundamental piece of our everyday lives. Millions of people around the world are shopping online. Having those tools in our hands makes it easy for us as developers to spin up those new stores. If you want to learn about how you can actually build your own online store, you can check out my new course on that's called E-commerce on the Jamstack on Level Up Tutorials. Walk through actually building an online store using Snipcart, Next.js, and Headless WordPress. I'll include the link in my talk notes, but you can also find it over at leveluptutorials.com. And that's it. If you want to learn more or chat about the talk, again, you can find me everywhere at Colby Fayock. You see this link here, colbyfayock.com/allthingsopen. Also tweet out some stuff you've seen today. Thanks, everybody.